we're looking at the 10 plagues. One of the things that we really want to understand is that the 10 plagues are ways that God shows his supremacy and power over Egypt's false gods. So God shows supremacy and power over Egypt's false gods. And one of the things that I'm hoping that we can see today as we go through the 10 plagues is that each of these plagues is actually chosen very specifically by God. And that he really, he's very careful with what he's doing and how he's doing it, because he's trying to communicate something to Israel, or to Israel and to Egypt, right? Because the big question that I have looking at this is like, okay, well, why didn't God just send one big plague that, freed his people? Why did he do this whole, like, okay, now the Nile's blood, now it's darkness, now there's gnats? Like, why is he playing this game? Does anyone have an idea of why they think God would kind of prolong this? Yeah, God is giving Pharaoh a chance to change his mind. Yeah, he's pointing to different things with each one. He's being very intentional with what he's trying to communicate through the plagues. Ultimately, I think that today, God's heart today is the same as his heart back in these times, is that his heart is that people would be saved, that people would know him. And ultimately, I think one of the reasons that God prolongs this period of plagues for Egypt is that he's trying to get them to see that he's God. He's like, I want you to believe in me. I want you to come with me. I want you to be saved. I want you to be freed from your slaveries. It might not be a physical slavery like Israel has, but the Egyptians have their own slaveries as well. So God is showing his supremacy and power. That's the big one. We're going to be looking at each of the 10 plagues in kind of two ways. The first way that we're looking at the plague is how it relates to one of the false gods of Egypt. So we're going to see, that's God showing his power over their false gods. The other thing that we're going to see is how the 10 plagues connect or correlate with miracles that Jesus does in the New Testament. It's almost as if, if a plague is meant to destroy, a miracle is meant to heal. And by trying to look at some of these connections, what we actually wind up seeing is that Jesus is not a plague, obviously. He's not destroying things, he's building things up, right? He's building up a kingdom. And so he kind of is working in an opposite direction of the plagues. And so we're going to see some connections in that. And there's more than just what I'm showing here, but I just wanted to keep it somewhat simple so we can walk through it together well. So one of the things that we're seeing here is that we're going from plagues in the Old Testament to praises in the New Testament. So one purpose of the plague is to introduce God to his people, right? Israel is calling out to God, and he's showing them, hey, this is who I am. I'm powerful. I can do anything. I'm not bound by location or by any other means. I am revealing myself to you. One of the purposes of the miracles of Christ is to fulfill prophecy and introduce God to his people. Jesus is showing us who God is through his miracles. In the Old Testament here, the Egyptians had been persecuting the people of God. In the New Testament, King Herod had been persecuting the people of God. Right? We saw even last week we talked about the drowning or the killing of the children and how those were the same. One purpose of the plagues is to demonstrate to the people of God that he is greater than any of the Egyptian gods. One of the purposes of the miracles of Christ is to demonstrate that he is greater than any other gods. One of the purposes of the plagues is that the news of the plagues may spread the knowledge of the glory of the God of Israel. So we see this when Rahab speaks about hearing what the God of Israel did in Egypt, right? When Israel gets all the way to Jericho, Rahab is like, oh, I've heard about the God that freed you from slavery. One of the purposes of the miracles is that the news might spread of the knowledge of God's glory, And we see this when Jesus is put on trial before Herod. He's heard of Jesus and the miracles and the desires to see for himself. So we see that there is a sharing of the truth of who God is that takes place through these types of things. All right, we're going to jump into Plague 1. So Plague 1 is the Nile River turning to blood. Miracle 1 is Jesus turning water into wine. And so does anyone see the correlation there? Wine. And then during communion, what does Jesus say about wine? This is my blood, my covenant poured out for you. Yeah. So this is a picture of Happy. I'm going to botch like most of these names, by the way. Happy, the Egyptian god of water bearing. So then what God is communicating over the Egyptian god is you think you're in control of your own Nile. You're not. I'm in control of your Nile. Just before this plague, Pharaoh tells Israel that they have to make twice as many bricks, and they don't get any extra materials to do that. He, in a sense, almost makes like an economic battle with Israel and goes, you need to produce all these bricks, come on, and you have no hay. And bricks in the Middle East like that don't survive without hay in them. So most of the work that they would be doing would be for nothing. It'd all fall apart. But what God does with the Nile is, well, the Nile is like the source of the economy for Egypt. And God goes, you think you're in charge of your economy. You think you're in charge of what's going on in your kingdom. You're not. I am. And that's where God flips the script on them. Similarly, you think about the wedding of Cana and how I love the line in that story of the guest who's like, normally people save the best wine for first because, after you've been drinking wine for so long, it's like, whatever. You can have bad stuff at the end. And like, you brought out the best wine at the end. In a sense, that's kind of reversing the economics of that. Of like, wow, you saved the most expensive stuff for the end, but also turning something very basic, like water that we all use and have, into something useful. Because back then they wouldn't drink water because of stuff in the water. You normally would drink something that's been fermented more, so they would drink wine instead, often. So he turns this water that's basically useful for cleaning stuff, and that's about it, and agriculture, into something that people can actually consume at that time period, which would be wine. But yes, all of which showing God's power over Happy. Yay. Happy times. Plague 2. The land is covered with frogs, which were overly fertile amphibians. And the miracle that correlates with was Jesus being born of a virgin, a divine fertility. The other children his age wound up in the rivers like the frogs in the plague. So that's Hecate, the Egyptian god of frogs and fertility. So you see they're kind of connected. And with this plague, first of all, ew. Frogs everywhere. We have frogs in our our front yard, in our garden and stuff. And my daughter's terrified of frogs. So it's kind of fun whenever we have a couple jump up on the... Yeah, they're super fun. Anyway, they like to stick onto our glass windows at the front of the house at night. Super fun. Anyway, that's a tangent. It's fine. But as we see here, right, the way that Jesus, or that God reverses this idea is with Jesus being born of a virgin. And that there's this miracle that comes about with his birth. Which is crazy too, because that's like a miracle that Jesus couldn't fake that, because he has no control over how he's born or who he's born to. Thank you. Plague 3. The land is covered in dust and gnats. The miracle that connects with that would be that Jesus used the dust and saliva to make a blind man see. So this is Jeb, or Geb, and I don't know which one it is, the Egyptian god of the dust of the earth. And so what we're seeing here, right, is that it's interesting, because I would think that, have you ever, walked through a little swarm of, no-see-ums ever? No-see-ums, the tiny little, you don't see them. But my grandparents have a cottage up in the Traverse City area, and there's always like a swarm right over their dock. And so every time you kind of walk through for like, I don't know, just a chunk of that dock, you kind of have to close your eyes to like get through it so that you can go and jump in the water, you know? Um, so it's funny because having the land covered in dust and gnats, what does that bring about for people if they're trying to do stuff? In a sense, kind of like a temporary blindness. You got to kind of, you got to close your eyes and get the dust out of them or get the gnats out of them, and you're not looking a whole lot. And it's funny that God uses dust then, or Jesus uses dust then to cure a man of his blindness. Whereas that's normally something that you think would probably cause it. And how he does that reversal on that plague. We tracking? Okay. Plague 4, the land is covered with flies. Jesus tells Nicodemus that rebirth only comes through him. So this one's interesting because the connection isn't specifically about flies, I'll give you that, but the connection is about kufri, kuripai, nailed it. I didn't take Egyptian, so anyway. The Egyptian god of creation, movement of the sun, and rebirth. And with that, his head, if you can tell, is shaped like a fly. Kind of a beetly fly, but a fly. It says it's a fly when I Googled it. Yep, he does. But that's Egyptian deity for you. That's fair. That's fair. But that there's this fly god, if you will, and the fly god is also this god of rebirth. And it's interesting that the Egyptians had a god that had power over rebirth. It's like, what does that mean in an ancient Egyptian mind? I know what it means in a Christian mind. And Jesus talks about rebirth with Nicodemus, the Pharisee who comes to him at night and goes, well, what do I do to be saved? And he's like, oh, you have to be born again. He's like, how does that happen? How does that work? He's like, well, it's spiritual rebirth, right? You've been born physically, now you need to be born again or spiritually reborn. And so that kind of correlates with the god of flies and rebirth. All right, plague 5, all the livestock die. It's a great one. The miracle that correlates with that would be Jesus casting the demon into a herd of pigs. And so God is showing his power over Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of love and protection. And what does she look like? Wow, that's not nice, but yes. A cow on a human body. Very nice. So, Jesus has this crazy, it's one of my favorite miracles of Jesus, is that he takes all of these demons that are in this crazy man, basically, that's been possessed by like 1,000 demons, and he takes all these demons and casts them into a herd of pigs. They actually beg for it. They're like, you could just destroy us. Please don't. Please just cast us into those pigs. And so Jesus casts the demons into a herd of pigs, and then the herd of pigs runs off of a cliff into the sea, and they all die, which is lovely, isn't it? Yes, Yosef. Yeah, great question. Be careful. No, I don't know exactly, but I think there's 2 accounts of this story. I'm pretty sure, and I believe one of them specifies that he's living in a cemetery. Not that there's anything inherently demonic about cemeteries, but that he may be doing things to try to attach himself to demons. That, yeah, kind of crazy. Anyway, demonology for you a little bit. But anyway, Jesus casts out the demons into the pigs, and then the pigs all die, killing a herd of livestock as well. Very fun how that's reversed. Also, a lot of people think like, wow, how mean of Jesus to like take all these pigs away from these people. Do you guys know what type of animals pigs are? And there's a very basic Jewish distinction of animals. Huh? They're unclean. Why is there a herd of unclean animals in the middle of Jerusalem? Well, yes, that's why they're unclean. But they shouldn't be. You're not allowed to eat them. So actually what's going on is also this herd of pigs is probably a sinful herd of pigs that someone has that they're not supposed to be having in that area. And so Jesus is not only cleansing this man of his demons, but he's also cleansing Israel of some of their unclean animals that maybe they've been eating or whatever. So it's kind of a twofer, which is neat. All right, halfway there. Living on a prayer. Plague 6. Everyone's skin is covered in boils. Jesus heals the woman who touches his cloak. So this is Isis, the goddess of medicine and peace. And so it's very interesting, right? God is saying, you think that you have all of the answers to medical issues in the world. What God is telling Egypt here is that you don't. I do. I can cause boils to come and go. I can cause sickness to come and go. I'm in charge of this stuff. You're not. Right? And with that, we see in the New Testament that there's a woman who has enough faith that just by touching the hem of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. And she just gets the side of it, and Jesus goes, who touched me? Who touched my cloak? Okay, he knows that, right? Jesus knows everything. He knows who touched his cloak. But he asks anyway. She goes, me. Why? Because I thought it would heal me. Your faith is great. You are healed, right? That's how that goes. Which makes me think, too, this is just a tangent at some point, but like, do we go to the Lord for healing? Do we go to the Lord and say, Lord, I've got some stuff going on. Can you heal? I would say this is maybe about a month ago, I came up to elder prayer. I've been having pain in my knee for like a year plus, to the point of like I couldn't run. It hurt to go upstairs. It was a pain. And I go to elder prayer and just ask them to pray healing over my knee. And the following day was the first time in over a year that I was able to kneel without any pain in my knee. God heals. He has power over medical issues. He does that. It's crazy. The pain comes back a little bit every now and then, I will say. But all in all, it feels better. Do you trust that God has, if God can give everyone boils, can he take away boils? Yeah. He can do that. Yosef, what's up? Yeah, or on its head, I don't know. Oh, maybe that's on purpose. Ooh. Plague 7. Hail rains down on Egypt. And then in the New Testament, we have this thing called the transfiguration. That's it. I was almost going to say transubstantiation. That's totally not that. The transfiguration, where Abraham and Moses come and meet with Jesus, which I think it's also crazy that that's Moses who comes down to meet with Jesus. And we're talking about Moses. But that's talking about, I'm just going to say Nut, and it's probably not Nut, but whatever. The Egyptian goddess of the sky. So, hail coming down from the sky. You think that you have a God in the sky that can protect you from things. No, you don't. Right? God is in charge of what comes out of the sky. And he's going to pour hail down on Egypt. Which Egypt's in the desert, too. I feel like that's also something interesting of like, where did hail come from in the desert? How is that a natural thing? Exactly. I'm like, to me, there's something in this that goes, there is something supernatural going on. Right? Exactly. You live really close to the Sahara Desert, and at least in comparison to us. So if we have a goddess of the sky, talking about the sky and what comes out of it, to have this moment where Jesus is kind of transfigured on a mountaintop, and Abraham and Moses come down and meet with him, that we're almost seeing a bit of a reversal of that even Jesus is saying, hey, I've got control of the sky. 8, locusts cover the earth. John the Baptist eats locusts and honey and declares the coming of the Messiah. We're talking about Seth. I can say that one. I know that one. The Egyptian god of storms and disorder. Yep, that's Seth. Kind of does look like an anteater. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. That might be a hat. I don't know. That might be a hat. Anyway, yes. Yeah, locust is kind of like a grasshopper. There you go. See? You're like John the Baptist. Perfect. Congratulations. One of the things that I was also thinking about, so it's very clearly like John the Baptist eats locusts in this story. In the plagues, God creates locusts and have them cover the earth. It's kind of a funny connection. But I was also thinking about, well, Seth is also the god of storms, right? Chaos. You think, okay, who causes chaos in Christian theology? Satan. He's the one who takes the ordered things that God has made and disorders them, makes them chaotic. Right? Often if you're trying to figure out, well, what's God, where is God in the situation? Well, where's the order? Where's the structure? God's probably somewhere in the order part of this. But I also thought about Jesus when he calms the storm. Right? That he's standing there and there's chaos. There's a crazy storm. Everyone's freaking out that they're going to die. And Jesus goes, don't you trust me? And he tells the storms to be calm and to be still. Right? He's got total power over the storms, over the locusts of the sky. Plague 9, darkness covers Egypt. When Jesus is on the cross, there's darkness as well. And so we're talking about Ra, the Egyptian sun god. He's the famous one. I think he dragged the sun across the sky or something like that. I don't know. Also, they have a snake on their sun, which is kind of fun. I don't know if that was maybe a solar flare. I don't know. But I think it's interesting that there's darkness in both of these elements, and especially when we think about how John talks about how Jesus is the light, and that when the light has been put out, Jesus has been killed, there's darkness. Interestingly, I think that when Jesus was crucified, Satan was probably sitting there going, I've done it. I did it. I beat God, finally. How stupid did he? You know? 3 days later, boom. God's back. Yeah. Exactly. You sealed your own fate there. Similarly, darkness covering Egypt. I mean, you think about it. What would they be able to get done in darkness? Nothing. The entire kingdom is shut down at some point, just because you can't go places and do things super easily. So Ra was no help to the Egyptians, but God proved himself as more powerful. Plague 10. There we go. The firstborn child, the firstborn son of every Egyptian household dies. Jesus, who is the firstborn of all creation, dies and rises again. Right? And this is God pointing at Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh was known in Egyptian theology as the supreme god. He was the big one. He was in charge of all the gods. He was in charge of everything. And if he couldn't save his own son from dying, that changes your theology. Right? If anyone, so this is the thing that I think is crazy too. If anyone in Egypt would know that the God of Israel is the true God, it would be Pharaoh. He's the one who's standing there with Moses. Moses going, let him go. And he says, no. And then a plague happens. Let him go. No. Another plague. And there's nothing he could do about it. He was completely powerless to God. Ultimately, we see Jesus, right, firstborn of all creation, die. But he rises again 3 days later. Right? It's almost as if, I like to think of it this way, if the death of Jesus is the purchase that was made to save you, the resurrection is the receipt. Right? Whenever we leave Costco, for some reason it's Costco, my kids always fight about who gets to hold the receipt for checkout, because then they draw on it. And sometimes if you give it to the people at Costco, they draw a little smiley face or something, and have fun with it. Anyway, so my kids want to hold the receipt. Why do they? Well, and then when we go out into the parking lot, what do I always tell my kids when they're holding the receipt? Hold on to that tight. We don't want to lose that receipt, because if we need to return something, we don't want to lose the receipt. The resurrection is the proof of purchase for your salvation. Hold on to that tight. We don't want to lose that receipt, right? So what do we? I'll pause really quick because I don't know what the next. I think the next slide might be our turn and talk. What are we thinking? Are we gauging okay? We feel like we maybe get this a little bit more. Yeah. It's super interesting to me. Like this, to me, is like. This is really interesting because not only does this correlate with the theology of the Egyptians in their day, but then it also connects to Jesus and his miracles. And it shows us who Jesus is as well.